You know that feeling when a long-term friendship just evaporates? No big fight, no dramatic text thread, just silence. Today, we're diving into this explainer on the hidden psychology behind the silent cutoff. It's a heavy topic and something so many of us experience but rarely understand. So let's jump right in.
Now, a lot of people assume there has to be some massive, explosive betrayal to end a years-long bond. But honestly, it's almost never one big fight. Instead, it's a long period of quiet calculation. People don't just wake up and randomly decide to erase years of history. It's a deeply internal process that's usually been brewing for a long, long time behind the scenes.
And here's the absolute core of what's actually happening. You didn't lose a friend, you simply outgrew the version of yourself they were still attached to, right? It's not necessarily a malicious rejection of the past. It's really just a necessary shift to protect your future. You're slowly realizing that the dynamic, as it stands today, just doesn't fit who you've become. Because there's this massive disconnect here. To the outside world, and usually to the friend being cut off, it looks totally impulsive. It looks cold, maybe even a bit heartless. But the inside reality is completely different. It's actually an intentional defense of your own growth. You're literally having to protect your evolving identity from an environment that just doesn't support it anymore. And psychologists actually break this departure down into specific stages. It all kicks off with stage 1, the identity mismatch. This is the root cause of the whole shebang. It happens when your identity shifts at a way faster pace than your social circle. As you grow, your core values evolve, your boundaries get a lot firmer, and your whole self-image upgrades. Naturally, your mind instinctively starts looking for alignment with people who reflect who you are today, not who you were, say, 5 or 10 years ago. Just think about the stark contrast between your past self and your current self. A lot of those old friendships were built around earlier versions of you. Versions maybe shaped by past confusion or limitations or literally just survival needs at that specific time in your life. But your current self? That version is driven by evolving values. It's looking for a stable self-image. This is exactly why staying tied to an old friend can feel like being violently pulled backward. You're essentially trying to keep alive a bond based on a ghost, a version of you that simply doesn't exist anymore. So once that mismatch hits, we enter stage 2, which is all about one-sided emotional labor. Because you've evolved and the dynamic of the friendship hasn't, keeping that connection alive suddenly requires this massive, exhausting amount of conscious work. This turns into a severe emotional imbalance. You know the feeling, right? When you are the only one consistently listening, supporting, or adapting, while the other person stays completely unchanged. Like we said earlier, relationships rarely end over one huge cinematic blowout. They die a slow death because of this exact unreciprocated effort, where the internal toll just relentlessly adds up day after day. And inside your mind, a very specific psychological shift is happening. First, that internal cost quietly accumulates because you're doing all the emotional heavy lifting. Then, and this is wild, your brain literally recategorizes the friendship. It totally stops seeing it as a connection and starts registering it strictly as a chore, just pure effort. And the result? Distance no longer feels like a painful loss. It feels like immediate, profound relief. Honestly, when avoiding someone feels like taking off a heavy backpack, that friendship is already fundamentally over. All of that overwhelming effort naturally pushes you right into stage 3, the stage of silence. This is the absolute hallmark of an internal departure. You'll notice the arguments just stop, the complaints stop. Those long, agonizing text messages trying to explain your feelings, completely gone. What's actually happening here is emotional withdrawal. It's an act of deep self-preservation where you conserve mental energy by simply disengaging. You stop defending your choices, you stop trying to correct misunderstandings. Because when you feel repeatedly misunderstood by someone, your mind realizes that tossing more words at the problem isn't going to bridge the gap. Internal communication has completely failed, so you just stop asking to be seen. Now, during this quiet period of withdrawal, as you're observing the dynamic from a distance, you hit stage 4, outgrowing the role. You start to realize that this friendship is actively trying to lock you into a fixed, completely outdated identity. Old friends, especially from childhood, get super comfortable with a very specific version of you, and they subconsciously demand that you keep playing that exact part. We've all been pigeonholed into these fixed roles. Maybe you were cast as the funny one, and suddenly you aren't allowed to have a serious or sad day. Or the quiet one, who isn't supposed to suddenly have strong opinions and boundaries. Or even the reckless one, who is honestly just trying to pay their taxes on time and go to sleep by 9 p.m. now. When you grow beyond that role, they push back. And that resistance, them wanting you to stay in that cozy little box, can feel incredibly suffocating. But that realization also brings immense clarity. The decision to leave isn't necessarily about disliking your friend. It's about refusing to stay confined to an outdated version of yourself. Walking away becomes this powerful, healthy choice. It's not born out of malice or hatred. It is literally just you prioritizing your own growth over staying trapped in a social role that doesn't fit reality anymore. Which brings us to the final, and let's be real, often the most difficult psychological shift in this whole process. Stage 5, accepting silent closure. Culturally, we're kind of brainwashed to think every ending needs a big, dramatic conversation, a full postmortem, a sit-down to hash out every single detail. But psychology tells a totally different story for outgrown connections. We usually default to forced dialogue, exhausting ourselves by explaining our perspective over and over when it clearly isn't leading to any insight or change. It's draining, and honestly, it's usually pointless. Emotionally mature people eventually embrace silent closure. They get that forcing dialogue won't magically spawn understanding out of thin air. They accept that some people just won't grasp their perspective, no matter how flawlessly it's articulated. So sometimes distance itself just has to be the final boundary. Not every ending requires an exit interview. When you look at this entire journey across the 5 stages, you arrive at a pretty empowering conclusion. Choosing to walk away from an old friend doesn't mean you're arrogant. It doesn't mean you're ungrateful for the good times you shared. It simply means you have bravely chosen coherence over chaos. You've chosen your own internal alignment over constant external friction. Because the healthiest minds understand that holding on sometimes costs a lot more than letting go. Look, not all connections are meant to be a lifetime contract. Some relationships are just meant to shape you for a season, teach you something valuable, and then release you into the next phase of your life. Recognizing that impermanence and acting on it with quiet dignity, that is the ultimate sign of psychological growth. So I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on. Have you ever had to initiate a quiet departure because you just outgrew the version of yourself someone was still attached to? Have you ever had to choose coherence over chaos? Think about what you learned about your own boundaries from that experience. Once you understand this pattern, you gain the power to own your journey completely guilt-free. Thanks for diving into